At first glance, Vienna seems to be a city much like any other, at least from a wildlife perspective. A casual glance will show you pigeons, sparrows, crows and magpies, all of which are fairly standard for an urban environment and, on the face of it, not particularly interesting. But if I've learned one thing, it's that you really should look a little closer. Even sparrows will exhibit interesting behaviours under the right conditions. And corvids, magpies and crows in particular, will exhibit all sorts of unusual behaviours when observed for any length of time. Although it should be said, whilst this behaviour is interesting, I'm not entirely sure what it is. Possibly courtship or dominance displays, but entirely unclear to me at least. The city has a number of unique green spaces, both in terms of their composition and their sheer size, available within the city limits. As one might expect, this makes wildlife a lot more prevalent and a lot less concerned about the presence of humans. This woodpecker, for example, was quite happily calling even though we were plainly visible to it. In the south of England, woodpeckers such as these are regrettably in short supply, or so it seems. They're very rarely heard and even more infrequently seen. Their scarcity is of course a matter of some concern, as with any other species. Whilst it seems their habit of digging holes in the side of trees would be quite disruptive to the plants, it actually can be beneficial by removing insects that would otherwise damage or even kill the tree or carry diseases. Among the green spaces particularly notable in Vienna is the Prater, an absolutely massive area of mixed woodlands and waterways that has been left almost entirely to its own devices. We saw a few of these yellow-bellied sliders, for example, utterly unconcerned by the comings and goings of everyone else, including dogs, which were quite interested in the turtles themselves. But a diverse ecosystem is inevitably home to both predators and prey. Here we see a grass snake, which, despite my initial concern, again was uninterested in my presence. By all appearances, it only had eyes for the edible frogs, which, it later turned out, were present in quite significant numbers in and around this pond in particular. Whilst not appearing to be the most immediately gamely of creatures, I can attest that these edible frogs were quite able to move with speed when the needs dictated, and clearly at least some of them were able to escape the snakes, because when they started calling in chorus, there were quite a few of them. And of course, the predator-prey relationships extend right the way up and down the food chain, with surprising abundances of virtually every species involved, clearly evident in Vienna. One of the more obviously dramatic insect predators is, of course, the praying mantis, and these can be found all over the Prater and other places besides, including on our tent. For a species normally noted for its ability to choose its environment to complement its natural coloration, the presence of a brown mantis on a reflective grey surface therefore leading the insect to stick out like a sore thumb, is a little surprising, although due to the presence of a rather excitable human filming and photographing the insect, no predator species seemed particularly interested in what otherwise would have been a free meal. Being a city with such a significant presence of waterways in and around its environs, it is perhaps unsurprising that dragon and damselflies also make a significant appearance among the insect population. As one might expect, the populations of these insects are varied and vibrant in coloration, but their behaviour was peculiarly uniform. Just about every individual we saw of either group was engaged in mating. They were far from alone in this. Many other insect species were all engaged in either courtship behaviour or the immediate aftermath. Some individuals, though, were behaving a little differently. Many of the European firebugs we saw in and around Vienna, and there were many of them in large swarms for the most part. But a few individuals were entirely separate from these groups, and apparently quite unconcerned by this fact, and this one was kind enough, or perhaps distracted enough, to let me get close enough to see that it seems to be inserting its mouthparts inside the otherwise quite tough seeds of one of the nearby tree species. Presumably it was feeding, but why to the exclusion of mating behaviours when so many others were doing the exact opposite is a little curious. When one is talking about green spaces in a city, or indeed any other urban environment, there is one group of spaces that is often overlooked: graveyards. As curious as it sounds, they are actually amazing spaces for wildlife to find refuge in a modern and very busy city. They're generally quite large, fenced in, so protected from some of the most significant threats to wildlife in the urban environment, namely vehicles. Although, in truth, Vienna's municipal graveyard is so large that it has its own internal bus service. And as you can clearly see, some quite large animals, unexpectedly so, make use of the space. This deer was one of several individuals we saw. Unlike the other individuals, which disappeared fairly quickly amongst the headstones, this one wasn't moving very quickly. I would like to pretend this was because it was unaware of our presence, but it did appear to be limping, although it was making no effort to get away from us even with that in mind. Young individual, which may explain its lack of caution. Equally, it may have been raised entirely within the confines of the graveyard and therefore never felt threatened by a human. Also possibly, it may have been primarily interested in food. As one might expect, a green space large enough to support roe deer, and a reasonable number of them at that, supports a number of much smaller species as well. The Vienna Municipal Graveyard is well known, in fact, for a significant population of hamsters. Although, unfortunately, we were unable to get any footage of these creatures, BBC Earth has some excellent footage that I will try and remember to post a link to. What we did see, however, was a significant number of red squirrels. Notably, not just the red morph, but the black morph as well, which I was under the impression was extremely rare. Apparently, nobody saw fit to inform the squirrels of Vienna. This was in actual fact something of a running theme. We discovered in the graveyards across Europe the black morph of the red squirrel was present in significantly greater numbers than their red counterparts. If anyone has any idea why this is, or whether this is just confirmation bias, please do let me know in the comments. As I have a particular fondness for these rodents, I spent quite some time observing and recording them. After a while, they became more accustomed to me being nearby, and eventually returned to ground level to continue their foraging. It then became quite apparent that not only were there red and black morphs of the squirrels present, there were also what I can only think of as hybrids, showing a mixture of red and black morph traits in their coats. For the most part though, the squirrels we saw were either red or black, and largely they were quite happily living alongside, or at least utterly ignoring one another's presence. Except for these two.